My name is Zoe, and the moment I realized something was wrong, I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, staring at my phone like it had just betrayed me. The number didn't make sense at first. $47,820. I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were tired. Maybe I'd opened the wrong account. Maybe it was some kind of glitch. But it wasn't. Every charge was real. Every line item sat there cold and precise, like it had been carefully planned.
Luxury boutique $12,4
Private spa retreat $5,200. First class flights $8,900. Designer accessories $21,320. All within 2 days. My hands went numb around the phone. I hadn't bought any of it. And then I saw the message. Thanks for everything, Zoe. You're the best. Red heart. It was from Lila, my brother's wife. I let out a quiet laugh, the kind that comes when something is so absurd your brain refuses to process it properly. Because surely this was a joke. Some misunderstanding. But Lila didn't joke like that. Lila calculated. I set the phone down slowly and leaned against the counter, trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest. The apartment felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath with me.
How?
That was the first question. The card had been in my bag. I was sure of it. I wasn't careless with money. Not after everything I'd worked for. Not after building my consulting business from nothing over the last 15 years. I retraced my steps. Sunday dinner. That's when she'd been here. She'd offered to help clean up, smiling that soft, harmless smile she wore like a disguise. I remember turning my back for maybe a minute, rinsing plates, trusting her in my space. That was all it would have taken. A minute. I pressed my fingers against my temples. Of course, I muttered. Of course it was that simple. My phone buzzed again. Another message. We're having the most amazing time. You should see this place. A photo followed. Lila stood on a balcony overlooking some coastal city, wind in her hair, wearing sunglasses and a silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. She looked radiant, effortless. On her wrist, a bracelet caught the light. I recognized it immediately, because I had just paid for it. I stared at the image longer than I should have. Not because of the money, though that alone was enough, but because of the expression on her face. Satisfaction. Not gratitude. Not even excitement. Just satisfaction. Like everything was going exactly according to plan. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the couch, suddenly unable to look at it anymore. My apartment, which I'd always loved for its calm, now felt unfamiliar. Like something had shifted. Like I'd missed something obvious. And maybe I had. Because this didn't start today. It never does. When I thought about Lila, really thought about her, I could trace it back months. Maybe longer. Little things. The way she would casually ask about my work, not out of interest, but with a kind of quiet curiosity, like she was measuring something. How much do consultants usually make? She'd asked once, sipping wine like it was just idle conversation. Or the way she'd joke about how organized I was whenever I kept track of expenses. You're like a walking bank, she'd laughed. At the time, I smiled. Now it didn't feel funny. Then there were the comments.
Subtle.
Always subtle. You work too much, Zoe. You should enjoy life more. Money's just sitting there otherwise, right? I wish I had your freedom. Freedom. That word lingered in my mind. Because to Lila, my independence wasn't something to respect. It was something to use. I walked over to the window, arms crossed, staring out at the city below. People moved along the streets like nothing had happened, like the world hadn't just tilted slightly off its axis. My brother, Ethan, had no idea. Or maybe he did. That thought hit me harder than anything else. Because if he knew, that meant something very different. I picked up my phone again and scrolled back through our messages. Lila's tone had been the same as always, light, playful, slightly dismissive. But now I noticed something else. Confidence. She wasn't worried about getting caught. She wasn't apologizing. She was thanking me, as if this had been my idea, as if I had given her permission. My stomach tightened. That wasn't just arrogance. That was strategy, which meant there was probably more I hadn't seen yet. I opened my banking app again, this time digging deeper. And that's when I found it. Smaller transactions. Spread out. $300 here. $650 there. $1,200 last month. Always just low enough not to trigger immediate alarm. Always just far enough apart to blend in. This hadn't started this week. This had been happening for a while. I sank into the couch slowly, the weight of it settling over me. She hadn't just taken advantage of an opportunity. She'd been testing boundaries, learning patterns, waiting. And then, when she was sure she could get away with it, she went all in. A strange calm came over me. Not forgiveness. Not even shock anymore. Just clarity. Because suddenly, everything made sense. The questions, the comments, the careful friendliness. None of it had been random. I picked up my phone again, opened her last message, and stared at it for a long moment. Then I smiled. Not the kind of smile I used to give her. This one was different. Sharp. Because Lila had made one mistake. She thought I was someone who wouldn't push back. She thought I'd stay quiet to keep the peace. She thought wrong. I typed a reply slowly. Enjoy the trip. I hit send, set the phone down, and leaned back. Because if she wanted a game, she had just started one she wasn't ready to finish.
I didn't sleep that night.
Not even for a minute. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that number again, $47,820, glowing in the dark like a warning I had ignored for far too long. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. The deeper I thought about it, the clearer the pattern became, and the more uncomfortable the truth felt. This wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate. And that meant I needed to stop reacting like a victim and start thinking like someone who understood strategy. By morning, I had already made coffee twice and hadn't finished a single cup. My laptop sat open in front of me, banking tabs, transaction histories, and old records spread across the screen like pieces of a puzzle I was finally willing to solve. At first, I went through everything methodically.
Dates.
Locations.
Amounts.
I wasn't just looking for what she took, I was looking for how she thought. And once I shifted my perspective, I saw it. The early charges weren't random. They lined up with moments she had access to my things. Family dinners. Birthdays. That one weekend she insisted on helping me reorganize my workspace. I even remembered how she laughed when she found my wallet in a drawer. Zoe, you really should be more careful, she had said. I almost laughed out loud now. Careful. The irony burned. Because she hadn't been careless at all. She'd been patient. And patience like that only comes from someone who believes they're smarter than you. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly.
Fine.
Then I'd stop underestimating her and start outplaying her. The first thing I did was call the bank. I didn't panic. I didn't accuse. I simply asked for a full audit of the account activity, flagged the suspicious charges, and requested a temporary freeze. My voice was calm, steady, the kind of tone I used in business negotiations when millions were on the line. Because this wasn't personal anymore. It was a case. Do you recognize any of these transactions? The representative asked. No, I said. But I will. That was the truth. Because I already had a feeling I knew exactly where this was going. After I hung up, I opened another account. Not my personal one. The business account. The one I rarely touch these days. And the moment it loaded, something clicked into place. There they were. More charges. Bigger ones. Older ones. Some of them categorized under vague labels: client hospitality, travel expenses, vendor services. But I hadn't had active clients in months. I stared at the screen, my pulse slowing instead of racing. Because this changed everything. If she had been using my personal card, it was theft. But this was something much more serious. And whether she realized it or not, she had just crossed a line she couldn't walk back from. I stood up and walked to the window again, sunlight now filling the room in a way that felt almost mocking compared to the night before. The city looked exactly the same, but I didn't. Something had shifted. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to be liked. I wasn't trying to keep peace. I was thinking clearly. And that made me dangerous. My phone buzzed. Ethan. Of course. I stared at his name for a second before answering.
Hey, I said.
Zoe, he began, his voice already tense. We need to talk. I almost smiled.
Vedo, he replied.
A pause. Then, Lila said you gave her your card. There it was.
Clean.
Direct. Not anger. Something else. Something colder. More focused. Because Lila thought she was playing with someone soft. Someone predictable. Someone easy to manipulate. But she had misunderstood one thing about me. I wasn't weak. I had just been choosing not to fight.
And now?
Now I had no reason to hold back. I closed the laptop, grabbed my coat, and headed for the door. Because sitting at home thinking wasn't enough anymore. If I was going to finish this properly, I needed to take control of every piece on the board. And I knew exactly where to start. By the time I stepped outside, the air felt different, colder, sharper, like it was cutting through whatever hesitation I had left. I didn't rush. I didn't second-guess myself. For the first time since all of this started, I moved with purpose. Because now I wasn't reacting to what Lila had done. I was preparing for what I was about to do next. The office building stood exactly as I remembered it, all glass and steel, reflecting a version of me I hadn't seen in a long time. My business had been quiet for months, almost dormant, something I told myself I'd get back to eventually. But standing there now, I realized something uncomfortable. I hadn't stepped away from it because I needed rest. I'd stepped away because I'd allowed myself to shrink. And Lila had noticed. Inside, everything smelled the same. Clean, controlled, professional. The receptionist looked up, surprised, but I didn't give her time to ask questions. I need access to the financial records and I need to speak with Daniel, I said. My voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. She nodded immediately. Daniel had been handling my accounts for years. Careful, precise, the kind of person who didn't miss details. When he walked into the conference room and saw me already sitting there with files open, his expression shifted from polite to concerned. Zoe, what's going on? I need a full review of all transactions linked to the corporate account over the last 8 months, I said. No small talk.
No softening.
He paused, then nodded slowly. All right. We went through everything together, line by line. And what I'd suspected at home became undeniable under proper scrutiny. The charges weren't just unauthorized, they were deliberately misclassified. Retail purchases labeled as business development. Luxury services disguised as client meetings. Travel expenses with no associated contracts. At one point, Daniel leaned back, exhaling quietly. This isn't just misuse, he said. Whoever did this knew how to make it look legitimate on the surface. I know, I replied. And they had access, he added. Not just to the card, but to how your system works. That part didn't surprise me. Lila had always paid attention. Not in an obvious way, never asking too much, never pushing too hard. But she listened, observed, collected information in small, harmless-looking pieces. Until those pieces became useful. How bad is it? I asked. He hesitated. Not a good sign. Zoe, if this gets formally reported as fraudulent activity under a business account, it's not just a dispute. This can escalate. There are compliance issues, legal implications, tax exposure. In other words, this wasn't something that could just disappear. Good, because I didn't want it to. I wanted it to matter. I need everything documented, I said. Every transaction, every inconsistency, every flagged detail. He studied me for a second. You're serious? Yes. Another pause. Then he nodded. All right. Hours passed without me noticing. Papers spread across the table, notes building into something structured, something solid. By the end of it, I wasn't just looking at random theft anymore. I was looking at a timeline, a progression, proof. And proof changes everything. When I finally left the building, the sun was already starting to dip lower, casting long shadows across the street. I should have felt tired, overwhelmed, even. But I didn't. I felt clear, like everything had finally snapped into focus. My phone buzzed again. A message. Not from Ethan this time. From Lila. Hope you're not stressing about the card. We'll sort it out when we're back, smiling face with smiling eyes. I read it twice. Then once more. The confidence was still there. Untouched. Unshaken. She had no idea. And that was exactly how I wanted it. I didn't reply. Instead, I slipped my phone back into my pocket and started walking. Because there was one more thing I needed to confirm. And I already knew where to go. Ethan and Lila's house was quiet when I arrived. Of course it was. They were still away. For a moment, I stood outside the door, key in hand, remembering when he'd given it to me. Just in case, he'd said. Funny how that worked out. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The place looked perfect at first glance. Clean, modern, carefully styled. The kind of home that looked like it belonged in a magazine. But perfection like that usually hides something. And it didn't take long to find it. The kitchen counter was covered in unopened mail. Bills. Statements. Notices. I picked one up and scanned it quickly. Overdue. Another.
Past due.
Another. Final notice. I set them back down slowly. So that's how they were living. Not comfortably, not securely, but stretched thin, trying to maintain an image they couldn't afford. And suddenly, the spending made even more sense. This wasn't just greed. It was desperation wrapped in entitlement. I moved through the house more carefully now, noticing details I would have ignored before. Expensive items placed strategically. Designer pieces that didn't match anything else. Purchases that felt recent.
Forced.
Then I reached the bedroom. I didn't hesitate. Inside, everything was neat. Too neat. Like it was arranged for appearance, not comfort. The jewelry box sat on the dresser. I opened it, and there it was. Proof, laid out without shame. Bracelets. Rings. Necklaces. Each one familiar from the transaction list burned into my memory. Each one a receipt in physical form. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the drawer underneath. Because inside it wasn't jewelry. It was paper. Organized.
Planned.
I pulled out the folder and opened it. My name. Printed. Highlighted. Asset summaries. Property estimates. Notes about my accounts. Observations written in careful, deliberate handwriting. Independent, but isolated. Emotional leverage, family connection. Gradual involvement recommended. My grip tightened. I kept reading. Timeline projections.
Steps.
Outcomes. And at the bottom, one line that made everything go cold. Full control achievable within 12 to 18 months. I stared at it for a long moment, not shocked, not even angry anymore. Just certain. Because this wasn't about a stolen card. This was about a plan. And I had just found the blueprint. I took out my phone and photographed everything. Every page, every note, every detail. Then I placed it all back exactly how I found it. No signs.
No wordiness.
Because the most powerful position you can be in is the one where the other person has no idea you already know. When I stepped back outside, the sky had turned darker, the city lights beginning to flicker on one by one. I stood there for a second, breathing in the cold air. Then I smiled, not out of satisfaction, but recognition. Because now the situation was simple. Lila thought she was controlling the narrative, but she wasn't. Not anymore. Now I had the evidence. Now I had the leverage. And most importantly, now I had a choice. I could end this quietly, or I could end it properly. My phone buzzed again. Ethan, can we talk tomorrow? In person. I looked at the message, then typed back.
Yes.
Come by in the evening. Bring Lila. I hit send and slipped the phone away. Because tomorrow, everything would change. Sunday evening arrived slower than I expected, like time itself was stretching just to test my patience. I didn't spend the day pacing or overthinking. I prepared. Not just the food, though I did that too, simple, familiar dishes, the kind Ethan grew up with, but the space, the atmosphere, the tone. Everything had to feel normal.
Calm.
Controlled. Because contrast matters. And tonight, the contrast was going to do half the work for me. By the time the doorbell rang, I was already standing in the kitchen, hands steady, mind clear. I didn't rush to open it. I walked. When I did, Lila smiled first.
Of course she did.
Zoe, she said warmly, stepping forward like nothing had happened, like she hadn't been spending my money across the world just days ago. She leaned in for a light hug, the kind that looks affectionate but means nothing. I let it happen. There was no point resisting now, not yet. Ethan stood just behind her. He looked different, tired, more serious than usual. His eyes met mine for a second longer than they normally would, and I saw it there, uncertainty.
Good.
Come in, I said, stepping aside. They walked in like they always had, but something was off. Not obvious, not loud, just a slight shift in the air, like a room before a storm. We sat down at the table. Plates filled, glasses poured. For a few minutes, everything played out exactly like it used to. Small talk, polite questions. Lila describing their trip in careful, curated detail, the view, the food, the experience. She avoided numbers. I noticed. Ethan barely spoke. I noticed that too. At the right moment, not too early, not too late, I set my fork down. I wanted to talk about something, I said. The shift was immediate. Lila's smile stayed, but it tightened just slightly. Ethan straightened in his chair. What is it? He asked. I reviewed my accounts, I said calmly, and I found some transactions I don't recognize. Lila didn't move, didn't blink, but she didn't interrupt either. Smart. What kind of transactions? She asked lightly. Large ones, I replied. Unusual ones. Ethan looked at her, then back at me. Zoe, he said carefully, we talked about this. Lila said you. I didn't. I cut in, still calm. Silence. Not loud, but heavy. Lila exhaled softly, shaking her head like this was all just unfortunate confusion. Zoe, we already went over this. You gave me your card. You said you wanted to do something special for us. Which card? I asked. A small pause. Barely noticeable. But I saw it. The one you handed me, she said. I nodded slowly. That's interesting, I replied. I stood up, walked to the sideboard, and picked up a folder. Then I returned and placed it gently on the table between us. Because tone matters. Aggression makes people defensive. Calm makes them listen. The card you used, I continued, opening the folder. wasn't my personal one. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? It was linked to my business account. That landed. Not like an explosion. More like a crack. A fracture. Ethan leaned forward. Zoe, are you sure? Yes. I slid the papers across the table. Statements.
Dates.
Amounts.
Clear.
Undeniable. Lila looked down at them. For the first time since she walked in, her expression changed. Just for a second. But it was enough. This doesn't make any sense, she said. Too quickly. It must have been a mix-up. $47,000 isn't a mix-up, I replied. Ethan's voice was quieter now. There's more than that here. Yes, I said. There is. I pulled out another set of documents. These go back months. I watched as he scanned them, his face shifting from confusion to realization, to something else, something heavier. You've been using this account for a while, he said slowly, looking at Lila. It wasn't like that, she said immediately. It was small things. And Zoe has more than enough. That's not the point, he snapped. That was the first time his voice broke through the tension. And it changed everything. Because now it wasn't just me speaking. Now it was him questioning. And once that happens,
control shifts.
I leaned back slightly, letting the silence stretch. Letting him think. Letting her feel it. Then I spoke again. There's something else, I said. Lila looked at me sharply. Ethan didn't look up. I reached for my phone and placed it on the table, screen lighting up with the photos. Recognize these? I asked. Ethan picked it up. Scrolled.
Slowly.
Each swipe changed his expression. Not dramatically, but enough. What is this? He murmured. Lila stood abruptly. Okay, this is insane. You went into our house? You went through our things. Yes, I said.
No επαλεγεί. No hesitation.
Because I needed to understand what was happening. That's a violation. So is theft, I interrupted. That stopped her. Ethan kept scrolling. Then he froze. His thumb stopped mid-motion. He stared at the screen, then read it again, out loud. Full control achievable within 12 to 18 months. The room went completely still. Even Lila didn't speak. Because some things you can't explain away. Ethan looked up slowly. At her. Lila. Her face had lost all softness now.
No worms. No charm.
Just calculation. You're taking that out of context, she said. Explain it, he replied. I was planning our future, she said. We're struggling, Ethan.
You know that.
Your sister. Don't, he said sharply. Another shift. Bigger this time. Because now, it wasn't about confusion anymore. It was about truth. You made me think she was losing control, he continued. You told me she was forgetting things. That she needed help managing money. I was trying to protect us. By lying? By surviving, she snapped. There it was. Not polished. Not careful. Real. And ugly. I watched them in silence. Because this part was never mine to control.
This was between them now.
Ethan stood up slowly. Not angry. Not shouting. Just done. You used me, he said. Lila didn't respond. Because she knew. And so did he. I stood up too. Not dramatically. Just enough to shift the focus back. This doesn't have to go further, I said calmly. Both of them looked at me. Different reasons. Different emotions. But it can, I added. And that was the truth. Not a threat. A fact. The room felt smaller now. Tighter. Like everything that had been hidden was finally visible. No masks left.
No illusions.
Just consequences. And choices. I looked at Ethan. Then at Lila. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt completely in control. Not because I raised my voice. Not because I forced anything. but because I understood something they didn't expect. Power isn't loud. It's precise. And, tonight, every move had landed exactly where it needed to. The silence that followed didn't break right away. It stretched, heavy and uncomfortable, filling every corner of the room until even breathing felt deliberate. No one rushed to speak. No one tried to smooth things over. That alone told me everything had shifted for good. Lila was still standing, her posture rigid, but the confidence she walked in with was gone. Not completely, people like her don't lose it that easily, but it was fractured. And once something like that cracks, it never fits back the same way again. Ethan remained where he was, one hand resting on the table, the other still holding my phone. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at her. Really looking. And I could see it happening in real time, that slow, painful process of reevaluating everything you thought you understood. Say something, Lila finally said, her voice quieter now, less controlled. You're just going to stand there and let her twist this? Ethan didn't react immediately. When he spoke, his voice was low, steady. She didn't twist anything, he said. I'm looking at it. That's not the full picture, Lila insisted quickly. You're only seeing what she wants you to see. I almost smiled at that, because it was exactly what she'd been doing to him all along. Ethan exhaled slowly and set my phone down on the table, almost carefully, like it weighed more than it should. Then give me the full picture, he said. There it was. A chance. And for a second, I wondered what she would do with it, because this was the moment where everything could have shifted, not back to what it was, but into something honest. Something real. But Lila didn't choose honesty. She chose defense. You know how hard things have been, she said, stepping closer to him. The bills, the pressure, trying to keep everything together. I did what I had to do. By stealing, he asked. Her jaw tightened. Don't call it that. What would you call it? She didn't answer immediately, because there wasn't a better word. Instead, she pivoted. She has more than enough, Lila said, pointing at me now, her tone sharpening again. This doesn't hurt her. It's not like we took something she needed. And there it was. The justification. Not denial. Not apology. Just entitlement. I stayed quiet, because I wanted Ethan to hear it, to process it without interference. That's not your decision to make, he said finally. But it is my reality, she shot back. We're drowning, Ethan. You know we are. And she's sitting here acting like this is some kind of crime when it's barely even noticeable to her. I tilted my head slightly. Barely noticeable? I repeated. She didn't hesitate. Yes. That word hung in the air longer than anything else that had been said, because it revealed everything, not just what she had done, but how she saw me, not as a person, not as family, just as a resource, something to access, something to use. Ethan stepped back slightly, creating distance between them. That's enough, he said. No, it's not enough, she pushed, her voice rising now. You're just going to take her side? After everything? After all the times she chose work over you? After all the things she didn't do? That hit harder than anything else she'd said. Not because it was true, but because it was designed to be. I didn't react, but Ethan did. Stop, he said firmly. You think she's perfect? Lila continued, ignoring him. You think she hasn't made mistakes? She left you alone half the time growing up, and now suddenly she's the victim. That's not what this is about. It is exactly what this is about, she snapped. You just don't want to see it because it's easier to blame me. Ethan's expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Because now, this wasn't just about money. It was about manipulation. Layers of it. Years of it. You lied to me, he said. The room went still again.
Different this time.
Sharper. More final. I didn't lie, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. You told me Zoe gave you permission, he continued. You showed me messages that don't exist. You made me question her. Lila opened her mouth, then closed it again. No quick response.
No smooth explanation.
Because this part, she couldn't control anymore. You made me doubt my own sister, he added, quieter now. That landed. Harder than anything else. Because betrayal between us was one thing. But between them, that cut deeper. I was trying to protect us, she said again, softer now. Ethan shook his head slowly. No, he said. You were protecting yourself. Silence.
Long.
Heavy. Irreversible. I stepped forward slightly, then not to interrupt, but to end it, because the conversation had already reached its conclusion. What came next wasn't about truth anymore. It was about consequences. This can still be handled privately, I said. Both of them looked at me again.
Different now.
Ethan grounded. Lila cautious.
How?
Ethan asked. I walked back to the table and opened the folder again, this time pulling out a separate set of documents. Everything that was taken gets returned or repaid, I said. Full amount. No exceptions. Lila let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You think we can just do that? I know you can't, I replied calmly, but that doesn't change the requirement. Her expression hardened again. Then what, Zoe? You report it? You ruin everything over money? I met her gaze directly. This stopped being about money the moment you planned it. That shut her up, because she knew it was true. Ethan looked between us. And if we do this, it ends here? Yes, I said. No legal escalation. No formal charges. And if we don't? Lila asked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Then it doesn't. That was enough. Because she understood exactly what that meant. I could see it in her eyes. The calculation. The risk. The outcome. For the first time since I'd known her, she wasn't in control of the variables. And it terrified her. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. This is a lot, he said. I know, I replied. He nodded once, then looked at Lila. We need to fix this. She didn't respond. Not right away, because agreeing meant admitting, and admitting meant losing. But refusing? That came with a cost she couldn't afford. Finally, she looked away. And that was her answer. Not spoken, but clear. I closed the folder gently. Take some time, I said, but not too much. Neither of them argued, because deep down, they both knew the same thing. This wasn't a negotiation. It was the end of one. And whatever came next would be decided by the choices they made now. I walked them to the door.
No hugs. No pretense.
Just distance, as it should have been from the beginning. When the door closed behind them, the silence returned. But this time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt clean, like something had finally been cut away. And for the first time since all of this started, I wasn't thinking about what I lost. I was thinking about what I had just taken back. The next 2 days passed slower than anything I could remember, not because I was waiting anxiously, but because I wasn't. That was the difference. I wasn't checking my phone every 5 minutes. I wasn't replaying the conversation over and over. I had already done what needed to be done. The rest was up to them, and for once, I wasn't going to carry responsibility for someone else's choices. Still, silence has its own weight. By the second evening, I noticed it, not as pressure but as space. The kind that appears when something is ending, even if you don't yet know exactly what comes after. I kept myself busy, but not in the old way, not as a distraction. I reviewed documents, organized files, finalized the reports Daniel had helped me prepare. Everything was ready if I needed to escalate.
Clean. Structured.
Unquestionable. That mattered. Because I wasn't bluffing. If they chose the hard way, I was prepared to follow through. On the morning of the third day, the answer arrived.
Not as a call.
Not as a message, but as a knock on the door. I knew who it was before I opened it. Lila stood there alone. No smile this time. No performance. Just tension held tightly under control. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside without a word. She walked in slowly, like she was entering a space she no longer felt comfortable in. That alone told me how much had changed. The same apartment she once moved through so easily now felt different to her.
Good.
We sat across from each other, the same distance I had deliberately created the night before. She placed a folder on the table between us. "I read everything," she said. Her voice was steady, but not confident. "I assumed you would," I replied. A small pause. Then she pushed the folder slightly toward me. "I'll sign." I didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, I watched her. Because words are one thing, but people always reveal more in what they don't say. "And?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. "And I'll return what I can. The rest, I'll figure out." There was a hint of resistance in that last part. Not refusal, but not acceptance either. She still didn't like losing. I nodded once and opened the folder. The documents were untouched and signed. She hadn't committed yet. Not fully. "You understand what this means?" I said calmly. She met my eyes. "Yes." "Say it." That caught her off guard. A flicker of irritation crossed her face. But I didn't move, didn't soften, because this mattered. Not for control, for clarity. "It means," she began, then stopped, choosing her words more carefully. "It means I repay everything. And this doesn't go further." "That's part of it," I said. Her jaw tightened slightly. "And the rest?" she asked. "It means this ends," I said. "Completely." She looked away for a moment. Processing. Calculating. "What about Ethan?" she asked quietly. "That depends on you," I replied. It was the truth. Because I wasn't the one holding their relationship together. And I wasn't the one breaking it either.
She was.
She leaned back slightly, her composure slipping just enough to show something real underneath. Not guilt. Not exactly, but pressure. "You really would have reported it," she said. Not a question. A realization. "Yes," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. Then she nodded. Slowly. As if something inside her had finally settled. "Okay," she said. That was it. No drama.
No argument.
Just acceptance. And strangely, that almost felt heavier than everything that came before. She reached for a pen, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then signed. One page, then the next, each signature quieter than the last. Final. When she finished, she placed the pen down carefully, like it marked the end of something she couldn't undo. Because it did. I closed the folder. Not rushed. Not satisfied. Just done. "There's one more thing," I said. Her shoulders tensed immediately.
"What?"
"You don't come back here," I said. Not for visits. Not for conversations. Not later. Not eventually. Her expression hardened slightly. "So that's it?" she asked. "That's it. And if Ethan wants, he'll decide that," I said, cutting her off. "But this part isn't negotiable." She looked at me for a long moment. Not angry. Not defensive. Just measuring. Then she nodded once. Understood. She stood up.
So did I.
For a second, it felt like she might say something more. Apologize. Explain. Try to recover something. But she didn't. Because she knew there was nothing left to recover. At the door, she paused. "You think you won," she said quietly. I shook my head. This isn't about winning. A small, humorless smile crossed her face. "It always is." "Not this time," I replied. that seemed to land somewhere. Not enough to change her, but enough to make her think. Then she left. The door closed behind her with a soft click.
No Islam.
No drama. Just an ending. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence that followed. And for the first time in days, it felt light. Not empty. Not heavy. Just clear. I walked back to the table, picked up the folder, and opened it again, scanning the signatures. Everything was in place. Everything was documented. Everything was real. No more uncertainty. No more doubt. Just resolution. My phone buzzed.
Ethan.
I looked at the screen for a few seconds before answering.
Hey, I said.
Was she there? He asked immediately. Yes. A pause. And it's handled. Silence on his end. Then, quieter, she signed. Yes. Another pause. Longer. More complicated. I don't know what to do, he admitted. That was the first honest thing he'd said since all of this started. And I respected it. You don't have to decide right now, I said. I feel like I should have seen it, he said. All of it. Maybe, I replied. But you didn't. He exhaled. Yeah. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. Just real. Can I come by later? He asked. Of course, I said. After I hung up, I set the phone down and looked around my apartment. Nothing had physically changed. Same furniture. Same light. Same space. But it felt different. Because I was different. Not stronger in some dramatic way. Not hardened. Just clearer. More aware. More grounded in what I would and wouldn't accept. And that changes everything. I walked over to the window, watching the city move like it always did, steady and indifferent. Life hadn't paused for any of this. And now, neither would I. When Ethan arrived that evening, he didn't knock right away. I saw him through the window first, standing outside like he wasn't entirely sure he belonged there anymore. That alone told me how much had shifted. He used to walk in without thinking, like this place was an extension of his own life. Now there was hesitation, distance, not because I had pushed him away, but because something inside him had changed. I opened the door before he could knock.
Hey, I said.
Hey, he replied. For a second, we just stood there. No awkwardness exactly, but not the easy familiarity we used to have either. Then he stepped inside, and the air between us settled into something quieter, more honest. He looked tired, not physically, though that was part of it, but mentally, like he'd been replaying everything, trying to reconstruct a version of reality that no longer fit together the way it used to. We sat down in the living room. No food this time. No performance. Just conversation. I talked to her, he said after a moment. I nodded. I figured you would. Another pause. It's over, he added. I didn't react immediately. Not because I was surprised I wasn't, but because I knew how much that sentence cost him to say. You're sure? I asked. He let out a quiet breath.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything left to fix. There was no anger in his voice.
No bitterness.
Just clarity. And that mattered more than anything else. I'm sorry, he said suddenly. I looked at him. For what? For not seeing it sooner. For believing her over you. He trailed off, searching for the right word, then shook his head. For all of it. I studied his face for a second. He meant it. Not out of guilt, but understanding. That's not something you fix by saying sorry, I said calmly. I know, he replied, but I needed to say it anyway. I nodded. That's fair. Silence settled again, but this time it wasn't heavy, just reflective. I keep thinking about everything she said, he continued.
About you.
About how she framed things. And the worst part is, some of it didn't even sound wrong at the time. That's how it works, I said. He looked at me. What do you mean? Manipulation doesn't feel like manipulation when you're inside it, I replied. It feels like logic, like concern, like someone helping you make sense of things. He leaned back slightly, processing that. Yeah, he said quietly. That's exactly what it felt like. Another pause. Then he looked around the apartment. It feels different here, he said. It is, I replied.
How?
I thought about that for a second. Because I'm not trying to hold everything together anymore, I said. He frowned slightly. You mean us? I mean everything, I clarified. People, expectations, relationships that don't actually work but look like they should. He nodded slowly. I think I was doing the same thing, he admitted. Just pretending things were fine because it was easier than questioning them. It usually is, I said. Silence again, but lighter, more grounded. He stood up after a while and walked toward the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the city. I don't really know what happens next, he said. You don't have to, I replied. He turned slightly. That's the problem, he said. I feel like I should. Why? I asked. He hesitated, then shrugged. I guess because I thought I had a plan, a direction. And now it's just gone. I stood up and joined him by the window. Plans change, I said. This feels bigger than that, he replied. It is, I said, but that doesn't make it worse. He glanced at me. It doesn't. No, I said. It just means you're starting from something real instead of something that wasn't working. He considered that, then nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. That makes sense. We stood there for a moment, both looking out at the same view, but probably thinking about very different things. After a while, he spoke again. I found something else, he said. I looked at him. What? She had been applying for credit in my name, he said quietly. I didn't even know. That didn't surprise me. Not anymore. Did she get approved? I asked. For one of them, he said. Not a huge amount, but still. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. That's another layer, I said. Yeah. Silence. Then he exhaled sharply. I feel stupid, he admitted. You're not, I said. I ignored things, he replied. I let her explain things that didn't make sense. I didn't question it. That doesn't make you stupid, I said. It makes you human. He looked at me. Feels like there should have been a moment where I realized something was off. There probably was, I said. You just didn't recognize it for what it was. He nodded slowly. Yeah. We moved back to the couch. This time, the distance between us felt smaller. Not physically, but in a way that mattered more. I don't want things to stay like this, he said after a while. Like what? I asked. Distant, he replied. I shook my head slightly. They won't, I said. You're sure? Yes. Why? Because now we're not pretending, I said. And that's the only way anything real actually works. He leaned back, thinking about that. I missed this, he said quietly. What? Talking to you without all the noise, he replied. I smiled slightly. Me too. Another pause. Then he looked at me again. What do we do now? He asked. This time, I didn't answer immediately, because this question was different. Not about fixing something. Not about reacting. About building. We start simple, I said finally. Simple how? We don't try to rebuild everything at once, I explained. We just show up. Consistently. Honestly. Without forcing it. He nodded. That sounds manageable. It is, I said. And if it's awkward, he asked. It will be, I said. At first. He smiled slightly. Good to know. We both laughed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But genuinely. And that felt like progress. Real progress. The kind you don't announce. The kind you just feel. After a while, he stood up again. I should go, he said. Okay, I replied. He hesitated at the door, then turned back.
Thank you, he said.
For what? For not giving up on me, he replied. I shook my head. That's not how this works, I said. You found your way back. I just didn't close the door. He nodded, then left. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it for a second. Not tired, not overwhelmed, just aware of everything that had changed, of everything that hadn't, and of everything that was still ahead. I walked back to the window one more time, looking out at the city lights.
Same view.
Different perspective. Because this time, I wasn't holding on to something that was already broken. I was starting from something that was finally real. And that made all the difference. 6 months later, I stood in my new apartment, barefoot again, just like the night everything started. But this time the feeling was completely different. Back then, I had been staring at numbers, trying to understand what had been taken from me. Now I was looking out at the city, watching the river catch the evening light, and thinking about what I had rebuilt. Not everything, not perfectly, but honestly, that was the difference. The space around me reflected that. Clean lines, open light, nothing excessive, nothing chosen to impress anyone else. Every piece of furniture, every detail, had one simple purpose. It belonged to me, not to an image, not to expectations, not to someone else's approval. And that mattered more than I expected. I moved slowly through the apartment, setting 2 cups on the kitchen counter out of habit. That had become routine again. Not forced, not nostalgic, just natural. Something that had returned without me having to chase it. A knock at the door broke the quiet. I didn't check who it was. I already knew. When I opened it, Ethan stood there holding a paper bag and a familiar half-smile.
Food, he said.
Good, I replied. I didn't feel like cooking. That alone would have been impossible a few months ago. Back then, everything felt like effort. Now it felt lighter. He stepped inside, looking around the apartment like he always did, even though he'd been here dozens of times already. I still think this place suits you, he said. It does, I replied. And it wasn't just about the space. It was about what it represented. We sat down unpacking the food, the conversation starting easily, work, small updates, things that didn't carry weight but still mattered. That was another change. Not everything had to be serious now. Not everything had to lead somewhere. After a while, he leaned back slightly, studying me. You seem different, he said. I raised an eyebrow. Different how? Calmer, he replied. Not in a quiet way. In a steady way. I thought about that. Maybe I am, I said. What changed? He asked. I didn't answer right away. Because the real answer wasn't simple. It's not one thing, I said finally. It's a combination of things I stopped doing. He frowned slightly. Like what? Like ignoring what I already knew? I said. Like trying to keep relationships that only worked if I kept adjusting myself. Like pretending something was fine, just because I didn't want to deal with what it actually was. He nodded slowly. That sounds familiar. It should, I said. You went through the same thing. He smiled faintly.
Yeah.
Just took me longer to admit it. That's usually how it works, I replied. We ate in comfortable silence for a bit before he spoke again. I heard something about Lila, he said carefully. I glanced at him. Oh. She moved again, he continued. Different city. Different situation. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. Doesn't surprise me, I said. He watched me for a second. You don't want to know more? I shook my head.
No.
Not even a little?
No, irapa.
That wasn't indifference. It was closure. There's a difference. He seemed to understand that. Fair enough, he said. Another pause. Then he leaned forward slightly. I've been thinking about something, he said. That's always dangerous, I replied lightly. He smiled. Yeah, probably. But hear me out. I nodded. I want to move out, he said. That didn't surprise me. Not anymore. Okay, I said. Have you found a place? Not yet, he replied. But I've been looking. Something smaller. Closer to work. That sounds like a good idea. He studied my reaction. You're not going to try to convince me to stay? I shook my head.
No.
Why not? Because you're not leaving, I said. You're moving forward. That landed. I could see it. Because the difference matters. Leaving feels like loss. Moving forward feels like choice. Yeah, he said quietly. That's what it feels like. We sat there for a moment, letting that settle. Then he smiled again. I think I'm finally starting to understand something, he said. What? That stability doesn't come from holding on to things, he replied. It comes from knowing what to let go of. I smiled slightly. That's a good way to put it. He leaned back, relaxed now in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Do you ever think about how differently this could have gone? He asked. All the time, I said. And I looked out the window again, the city lights reflecting off the water. It probably would have ended worse, I said, if nothing had forced us to see things clearly. He nodded.
Yeah.
I think so too. Another pause. Then he looked at me again. Are you happy? He asked.
It was a simple question.
But not an easy one. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because the answer had changed. Yes, I said. Not perfect. Not constant, but real.
And that was enough.
He smiled. Good, he said. We finished dinner, cleaned up without talking much, the kind of silence that feels natural instead of forced. When he got up to leave, it didn't feel like an ending, just a continuation of something steady.
At the door, he paused.
Same time next week, he asked. Of course, I said. He nodded and left. I closed the door and stood there for a moment, just like I had months ago. But everything was different now. Back then, I had been reacting. Now I was choosing. I walked back to the window one last time, looking out at the city that never really changed, only the way you see it does. And that was the part people don't talk about enough. You don't rebuild your life all at once. You don't fix everything in a single moment. You make one clear decision, then another, until one day you look around and realize you're no longer living in the same reality you were trying to escape. You built a new one, quietly, deliberately, without asking permission. I picked up my phone and opened a blank message, then paused for a second before typing. Not to Ethan. Not to anyone involved in the past. Just a note to myself. Pay attention next time. I read it once, then locked the screen, because that was the real lesson. Not about money, not about betrayal, but about awareness. About trusting what you see, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it changes everything. I set the phone down and smiled slightly, because now, if something like this ever tried to happen again, it wouldn't get past the first move. And that was the kind of peace no one could take from me.